Hi everybody, welcome to my History of Games and RPG series where I turn a spotlight on a moment in history. I do this through publication, usually a book from which I read, quote and discuss. Now today I am using The Dice Men, which is written by Ian Livingstone, one of the authors of the Fighting Fantasy books and one of the original founders of Games Workshop. This book details that origin story and it features Steve Jackson. He contributes some text, but it's largely written in Ian Livingstone's voice. And today I want to have a look at the relationship between Gary Gygax and TSR and Games Workshop. Games Workshop ended up selling Dungeons & Dragons products exclusively in Europe, which, as you could argue, was a massive part of their success, which led on to many other things. So, going to be using this book. There are two areas in the book I want to have a look at. So the first one is pretty early on. Now, Games Workshop is at its early stages, so they haven't really done a lot. And Steve and Ian, they have discovered a game called Dungeons & Dragons. They've managed to purchase a copy. We will pick it up here at page 54. While Steve and I were obsessing about Dungeons & Dragons, John was doing anything but. Roleplay wasn't his thing. However, we all agreed we should import the game to sell in the UK. So originally, John was one of the founders with Steve and Ian. However, we all agreed we should import the game to sell in the UK. The problem was that we only had enough available cash to order 6 copies. They never had any investment in Games Workshop early on. It was really difficult for them to sort of have any sort of cash flow. Amazingly, that was enough to qualify for a trade discount. The timing of our order could not have been better. Gary Gygax's company was also in its early stages, and he welcomed the opportunity to have a European distributor. Incredibly, on the back of this tiny order, Brian and Kevin Bloom, obviously massive figures in the Dungeons & Dragons history, Gary's new business partners at Tactical Studies Rules, TSR, the famous TSR, following the sudden death of Don Kay, sent us a 3-year exclusive distribution agreement for the whole of Europe. We could hardly believe our good fortune. We were all role-playing as businessmen engaged in the business of role-playing games. No matter, we were now the official UK and European distributors for Dungeons & Dragons. We duly received our 6 copies and thus began its well-documented rise to fame on the side of the Atlantic in tandem with what was happening in the US. Whenever I read about this particular situation, it staggers me. They managed to land this deal. The wave was just beginning to surge, and they were there. Steve and Ian, they were caught with it, and the craze of D&D spread across the world, the Western world, and they had their fingers in the pie, if you like. And over the next few years, they sold many Dungeons & Dragons products. They played the game, they designed dungeons, they went on their Games Workshop stalls, as you can see in this picture here. They would advertise Dungeons & Dragons, and it was a massive boost for Games Workshop. I mean, probably the reason why they existed at the time, that most of their sales came through Dungeons & Dragons. And they actually started to make products for Dungeons & Dragons. So they would make, they were working on the monster manual, the maps, character sheets. It became a massive intrinsic part of Games Workshop. A lot of people don't realise this. And their Owl and Weasel, their magazine at the time, they were writing reviews for it, and they also ended up putting a lot of stuff in White Dwarf. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip forward. So we've got a company that has been successful at Games Workshop through getting this license, and their company has grown. And they're obviously thinking about, right, let's make our own products and all that type of thing. Now, this is chapter 13, Independence Day. So we've jumped forward to the point at which TSR and Games Workshop break up. And I'm going to read out the thing here, and it's an interesting process to sort of see the foundation and the kind of how they got their hands on this treasure, and then how it was then viewed by Gary Gygax, who, you know, remained their friend up until his death. And he came across to the UK and met with Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson, you know, a few times. The most important thing about 1979 was that it was the year our 3-year exclusive distribution agreement from TSR to publish and distribute D&D and AD&D in Europe would end. Technically, our agreement had expired in 1978, but TSR had let it run onto 1979. The AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide was about to come out, and we wanted to launch it in the UK at Dragonmeet 2. We had several conversations with Gary Gygax about renewing the distribution agreement, but we weren't getting very far. Gary had other ideas. He sent his business consultant, Al Sanders, to London with a proposition. Sanders told us that Gary acknowledged we had done a very good job at distributors for TSR, and he looked forward to a long-lasting relationship. And for Gary, the best way for that to happen was for our two companies to merge. That's quite a step away from licensing a product, to merge your company with another company. And it's quite a cheek in a way that they should come across and expect that they should merge with them. Let's read on. A merger proposal was the last thing we were expecting. So you can imagine us sitting down, they're going to have a discussion, right, we're going to expand out the license and carry on doing what we've been doing the last few years. We'd been hoping that Sanders was in town to negotiate new terms on behalf of TSR to renew our distribution agreement. We calmly talked about how the merger entity would operate and offered us a third of the equity of the new company. So they were offering a third of the equity. We were in shock and told him we would have to think about it. He couldn't believe we didn't jump at the offer right there and then, and told us in the nicest possible way that he thought we would be foolish to turn the offer down. We would lose our exclusive distribution agreement, and TSR would have no choice but to set up a TSR UK. Whilst this put us in a bit of a quandary, what he didn't understand was that we were independently minded young Brits who were working round the clock to build our own business, and on the backs of the sales of Dungeons & Dragons, they were making their own products, and they had plans and a staff who were loyal, and they didn't want to let them down by selling out to another company, I guess. The last thing we had in mind was to sell Games Workshop, and we didn't relish a life split between London and Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. We called Gary that evening to see if there was alternative solution. There wasn't. He told us that he wanted us to be on the board of directors of the TSR Games Workshop merger company, since we were like-minded people with complementary skills, and together we would be unstoppable. We were flattered, and it was tempting, but we declined the offer. We told Sanders the next day. He couldn't believe it and told us we were mad before flying back to the US to report back. On the plus side, we'd bought a bit of time, and TSR begrudgingly shipped the DM's guide to us in time for Dragonmeet 2. It sold faster than the proverbial hotcake. Our stand was besieged by customers. I remember our staff saying that it felt like they were being beaten to death by £10 notes. So there's a few things there. Obviously, he doesn't talk, and respectfully so, about the conversations that they had with Gary Gygax. He doesn't talk about his mood, his approach. He just said, was there an alternative solution? There wasn't. Simple, short. I wonder whether they had arguments. I wonder whether Gary was angry with them that they shouldn't take the proposal. It's pretty clear that that Sanders, who comes across to negotiate, he thinks they're stupid for not taking the deal. So they were obviously very bold and brave to face up to this massive company that was becoming TSR and Dungeons and Dragons, and they said no. Here we go. You can see a picture of them with Gary Gygax at the top there. Still not convinced that we meant what we said. Gary Gygax flew to London in November to try one last time to persuade us that the merger proposal would be the best outcome for our companies. But there was no changing our minds. Whilst our future business relationship with TSR would become strained because of the merger fallout, we were still good friends with Gary and went out for dinner with him that night. I also took the opportunity to get him to sign my copies of AD&D rulebooks. And I think that, that whole episode, that relationship, it's fascinating. And two companies on the rise, one bigger, TSR, with this massive Dungeons & Dragons product in a huge market that is America. And then we have a more kind of smaller niche Games Workshop with two guys at the helm who decided, sort of in a sense, to push off this larger bully in a way. They expected a certain thing from Games Workshop, they didn't provide it. And in the end, it became a little bit petty. There was wrangling over contracts. They left them out of the credits for this book. And it's unfortunate, really. I don't think we see the total picture here, but it's certainly interesting reading and a fascinating episode in the history of role-playing games. Guys, I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, click the thumbs up, and if you're not subbed already, it'd be awesome if you could. If you've got any comments or questions, add them in down below. I'll try and answer them, or if you want to add something to the conversation, please do. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll catch up with you soon.